gonna not take damage and I'll go heal. Although if we could get to level 3, that would be kind of nuts. What is that thing? Is that gonna destroy me or can I fight it? Oh god! Fairune on the Switch. Kinda. It's complicated. Basically, I saw this game on sale on the eShop as part of a bundle including its sequel game, as well as 2 games that are exclusive to this collection. This is initially a 3DS game, and honestly, I'm having a little bit of trouble trying to, like, qualify exactly whether this would be technically Switch or 3DS. We're gonna say Switch, though, because it is being played on a Switch. This was an interesting game for me. When I saw it on sale on the eShop, I took a look at the description and at the trailer for it, and it sort of pitched itself as a collection of, like, short coffee break RPGs. I love that idea because RPGs are great. They have a lot of fun mechanics. It's my favorite genre, if you can't tell. But, you know, they tend to take a long time, so having smaller RPGs is kind of an interesting concept. And it reminds me heavily of my favorite PSP game of all time, Half Minute Hero. A game that distilled the RPG aspects down and refined them to such a pure point that you could have entire RPGs take up the entirety of 30 seconds. Now this game is not quite as short as Half Minute Hero. My first playthrough of this game, and I got stuck a couple places, took about like 2 hours, 6 minutes. I've got a full playthrough on this channel, and I gotta say it was good, but it has some hiccups. The story to Fairune is fairly simple and honestly a bit of a throwaway. It's been about 100 years since the last cataclysm where a chosen hero had to step up and save the day, so now it's your turn. There's 3 mystical, sacred icons of fairies strewn about that you have to collect and save the day. Yeah, they're doing the whole hide-lide thing again. Or, you know, if you want a good game by comparison, 3D Dot Game Heroes. It's been a while since I've talked about that game. While the story itself is rather incredibly simple and honestly just a complete excuse just to have an adventure altogether, I do appreciate that there is some nice background storytelling in this game. There is some nice environmental sort of storytelling, and as you go through the game, you kind of see sort of like a shift in tone a little bit, and that was really, really cool. I have to admit, while the storytelling to this is, at best, lackluster, it still does have some interesting world design and storytelling within it. I kind of wish they expanded more upon that and had more of it, honestly. But you know what they have here? Still pretty interesting. Basically, you're just the hero for the sake of this game having a hero, though. You run around collecting new items to solve basic puzzles. Comparing this game to a RPG isn't really all that accurate, though. The only real RPG elements this game has is HP, experience, and levels. So there's some mild stuff there, but it really does feel more like a standard old-school adventure game, closer to, say, Zelda 1, although with heavier influences on using items to solve your problems. The game may initially appear to be sort of a giant open world where you can explore, get a general feel for what you're doing, and kind of understand what this world is, and it does at first present itself like this. When you start, you're given a magical dress of invulnerability before you actually get your weapons, which makes you unable to take any damage from any enemies whatsoever. This is kind of cool because you can wander around for a couple dozen screens seeing exactly what this world is like and what the layout is. I definitely appreciate the game allowing you to actually explore before the game actually takes place. That's kind of cool, and it lets you do things at your own pace, at least initially. However, once you actually get the sword, which can happen in a matter of moments when you start the game, then the game kind of stops being so open world and kind of more or less becomes a really, really fancy tunnel. See, the thing about this game is it is an incredibly linear experience, and that's not to say it's necessarily a bad thing that it's this way. However, the way it's structured is a little bit peculiar, especially because it is unclear at points what you necessarily need to do. Your goal, ultimately, is to defeat the big bad at the end of the game by using items to solve a puzzle, solve another puzzle, solve another puzzle, until you get to the end of the game. And that works on a very fundamental level. Like, I think that's a good idea. It's not a complicated idea, it's an idea plenty of games have done before, but this one does it a little bit more peculiarly because it does decide to throw in experience and leveling mechanics. And I can't really get any further in without talking about combat, so let's talk about combat. Similar to Ease or the aforementioned Hide-Lide, this game has the classic tried and tested combat system of smushing your face into the enemy and hoping you kill it before it murders you. And that's kind of it, at least initially. But this game is, again, trying to use RPG systems, so it actually is heavily level gated. Any enemy that is lower level than you, you can just smush, and then you get to move on with no threat to your own health, but also no experience. Enemies that meet your level, you'll take 1 damage as they take 1 damage. If you win, you get 1 experience. You can also fight enemies 1 level above you, but you'll take double damage with still the result of 1 experience, so there's no real reason to go after higher level monsters. There's no incentive to it, which I find to be a little bit peculiar altogether. Enemies that are higher than that will completely deflect you, cause you to take massive damage, and you have no hope of gaining any sort of advantage over them, because again, combat is just smushing your face into them and hoping that your numbers are a little higher than your opponent's. It's an uncomplicated system, but because it's structured in such a way that you can't really go against enemies stronger than you, it creates a soft level gate for every single screen in the game. See, you can run to the next item, grab it, and try and advance the game, but if you're below the next enemy that covers that area, you're gonna have a bad time. And while that's a soft level gate, you can sometimes sort of dance around them a little bit. That's not too bad. This game actually features areas that are hard level gated as well. You'll literally walk into a room with a locked door, several enemies that exist purely to test your level, and if you can kill them all, the door unlocks and you can grab the next item. There is no way to avoid combat with these guys, and again, if they're higher level than you, you simply can't do anything about it. You have to turn around and try and find your way back home to where you can actually start grinding. And there is a bit of a grind to this game, which kind of creates an issue and a conflict with its key premise, which is that it is a smaller RPG. Because this game isn't designed to be a huge, massive RPG, there really shouldn't be any need to pad it out by forcing grinds on anyone. It doesn't make a lot of sense, and it just exists to waste time. And at the absolute very least, it creates a weird pacing issue with the rest of the game. A short-form pure RPG experience, or whatever this game is trying to be, it should be faster, it should be snappier paced. If it stops you to force you to grind just to overall pad out the experience, that's taking away from what this main core objective of what this thing is. Plus, it's not really respecting your time as a player. I mean, I'm all for RPG grinds. Well, I mean, I'm not. I hate grinding in RPGs, but, you know, I recognize it as an important key mechanic at times, but in a very short-form RPG, it really does not do the game's concept any service. Especially when, ultimately, the only things grinding really does ultimately accomplish is take away those level gates and give you slightly more health. It's not like you're doing more damage or you're ultimately gaining more stats, because outside of your health, there are no stats. You're either doing 1 damage to something or you're doing 0 damage. It's that simple. There's really genuinely no reason to have any sort of grind in this game. Likewise, while this game does use very simple adventuring puzzles that you'll have seen in other RPGs, i.e., oh look, it's a forest, but those trees don't have stumps so you can walk underneath them, others are a little bit less clear. This was actually a source of me getting stuck very, very early on, where you have to actually follow a path hidden in some trees, and you come to this little clearing, and then you're kind of stuck because there's no reason to go here. What you have to actually do is push this one rock in this clearing out of the way to make something appear. Now, that might kind of come across as an obvious thing because it's something that's there, but I have to point out that there are several other rocks you'd have run into at this point that look identical and you can't do anything with. I think they could have added a little bit of a visual shorthand to indicate that there was something of import with this single rock, like small little scratches on the ground to show it had been pushed or something. Indeed, this is actually the first time you ever actually push any object in this game as well, which in turn makes it extra obtuse. I mean, before this, you might not even realize that pushing objects is even a function of this game. It doesn't destroy this game by any means, but it is a little obnoxious. There's a few areas in this game that just have puzzles that are just unclear. And while this game does ostensibly have a help system, its help system just tells you what enemy is at your current level, which in a vague sense can kind of help. You've taken out every enemy in this area, these are the next enemies you have to look out for. Any area populated by these guys will kind of be where you need to go next. It's still not 100% clear, and there's not really any item descriptions or anything. You just sort of wander around hoping you understand what the puzzles are. And some items are actually used for multiple puzzles, so if you happen to leave the item where you think it's done with, because not a lot of items get reused, well then you gotta march all the way back to where you last used it, pick it up, and then move it to the next place you need it. And that's happened to me 2 or 3 times. It's not a common thing, but it is a little bit obnoxious. Especially because while this world is small, it can only really be navigated 1 or 2 ways. There's a couple of shortcuts, but nowhere near as many as there should be. And there's only one fast travel point, and you only get to go there if you die. And it's not really in the most convenient place, considering how blocked off certain bits of the environment are. I don't want to sound like I'm entirely negative about the gameplay to Fairune, because I do enjoy it. I quite enjoy the idea of a smaller RPG that is easily digestible and allows you to draw upon your years of experience with gameplay, because playing multiple RPGs that are kind of like this, you can pick up a couple of tricks. You know a couple of ideas that they're going to use here because it is something of a throwback. But at the same time, there are a lot of issues with it. Things being unclear, enemies level gating certain areas for you, having to walk very, very far distances around a kind of maze-like map at times just to get back to where you need to if you die. Or if you happen to fall from a certain area and then you have to go through like 20 screens to get back there, and that's not an exaggeration. I think that was actually made to be like a quick travel back once you were done with that specific area, but you could very easily just stumble upon it and have to march all the way back up there through a tower full of traps and take a lot of damage. It's also worth noting that the final boss just kind of comes out of nowhere. Like, not in a structural sense, but in a gameplay sense. I guess because they didn't want the final boss to just be you smushing your face into it for like 10 seconds and then killing it, they decided to go with a completely different gameplay style that just kind of comes out of nowhere. If you don't go into this game kind of expecting it or being prepared for it, or, you know, heaven forbid, you go into this expecting sort of an RPG adventure type thing, this might be basically an impossible hurdle at the end of the game. It's sort of like those old Sierra point-and-click adventure games that had really poorly coded, like, action sequences in them, except this is actually, like, competently made. And it even has an easy mode if you fail a whole bunch of times, but still, it feels like it just kind of comes out of nowhere, and if you're not prepared for it, and indeed, it's not something you wanted to even be there in your adventure game, it might basically wall you. And I don't think that's particularly good design. There are issues with this game, but at the same time, it is a pretty fun little RPG. And, you know, I was pretty floored when I learned, hey, there's actually more than one map to this game. There's actually like 5. And while it certainly is obnoxious to level gating, and while the puzzles aren't inherently super clear, the fact is, while there are a lot of issues with Fairune, I think it is a nice, simple, humble little game. Not perfect, but if you're in the mood for a smaller RPG, gameplay-wise, yeah, it's not bad. The presentation to Fairune it's okay. Visually, it's decent. It's got some nice vibrant colors. The character designs are quite nice. The items are all visually distinct as well, which helps you to, you know, not confuse certain items in your inventory. And I do quite like the enemy designs. It does feel like a couple are sort of based off each other. Audio-wise, it's fitting, it's decent. I don't think there's anything terribly standout about it, but it works. And I think the overall presentation to Fairune is pretty damn solid. Maybe not top tier, but you know, for a game that sort of tries to hinge on the whole need to experience nostalgia, you know, I think it works pretty well. If you want a copy of Fairune, the 3DS version is about $4, and that seems a little bit high. However, you can get the collection, which I have on the Switch, on Steam, as well as, again, on the Switch, and it's sitting at about $12. Again, might be a tad high, but I've also seen this go on sale for like $2 or $3, so it can be fairly inexpensive, and if you're prepared to forgive this game for some of its clunky design and its really obnoxious level gating, this can be a pretty fun little game. And if you get the collection, you get its sequel as well as a prequel and a whole new game as well. Fairune is not half-minute hero. It does not distill all the great things about RPGs and throw it at you in a very fast, quick, and pure experience. It doesn't. But for a smaller sort of adventure game with a little bit of RPG elements, and granted some obtuse puzzles and some obnoxious walking around in some places, you know, if you can get past its flaws, this game isn't too bad. It's not one of my most recommended games ever, but you know, in the collection, if you can get it on sale, I'd say it's worth the money, for sure. Yeah, I wish if you fought things, like, above your level, you'd at least get... Oh, well, that sucked.